Hey everyone, my name's Dom, welcome back to the channel. Today it's time for my review of Empire in Black and Gold, Book 1 of The Shadows of the Apt by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Stick around to hear more. So Shadows of the Apt by Adrian Tchaikovsky is one of my favourite series. It sits firmly in my top 10 list and it's probably going to take a little bit of shifting before it falls outside of that list. This is a rare reread for me. I don't generally read books again. I've probably done about half a dozen over the course of my adult life. So this was a real rarity for me to reread Empire in Black and Gold, and I did so because of the read-along hosted by the Library of Alexandria, reading Empire in Black and Gold as part of what's been called August of the Apt, and then the next 3 months are going to follow books 2, 3 and 4 in this 10-book series. Now if you want to find out more about the series as a whole and my thoughts on why you should maybe pick up this series to read, I'll link up in the cards above my overview of the series, aptly titled Why You Should Read The Shadows of the Apt. So this read along I went into with a bit of trepidation because, as I say, it's one of my favourite series. There's going to be a load of new people reading it. What if they don't like it? But worse than that, for me on a personal level, what if my tastes have changed and I don't like it? So I was a little bit apprehensive, but I'm happy to report that I did enjoy it again. I really liked being back in this world. And the general consensus amongst those in Alan's channel who've also read the book or started to read the book, the general consensus is that they are also enjoying it. So happy days all round. I'm really pleased about this, and hopefully this is going to continue to lead to some great discussion as people carry on with the series and as more people start it with Empire in Black and Gold. Now this book's different from pretty much all of the fantasy that I have read outside of Shadows of the Apt, not just in the world building and the general concept, which I'll talk more about in a bit, but just in the general storyline. We're dealing largely with a community of spies. The main character, as listed on the back of the book at least, is Stenwell Maker. He's kind of pictured as an aging spy master, and he's recruited a bunch of young people. He's done this over the years, and we're focusing on this new batch of spies that he's recruited and nurtured, and he's now sending out into the wider world because there's an invasion of his homeland on the horizon, and he's trying to do what he can to open everyone's eyes to this invasion because so far they've been blind and either unwilling or unable to see the imminent threat. So in terms of that threat, Stenwell Maker lives in a place called Collegium. It's a university city. The world is kind of in the early stages of an industrial revolution, and Collegium is really one of the homes of knowledge. It's one of the places where people go to learn the skills of artifice, and you've got all of these other cities like Haleron, which also features heavily in the book, which are real industrial cornerstones of this world, and the knowledge that the people have in places like Haleron generally comes from Collegium. They go there to learn the skills and then they take them out into the wider world. So all of these cities like Collegium, like Haleron, make up what's called the Lowlands. There's no kingdom, there's no kind of ruler of the Lowlands or anything along those lines. They are just independent cities, what's often called city-states, and there's no kind of real relationship between these cities other than kind of things like trade relations and so forth. So the thing that really sets this world apart is the people, and this is where we need to get into a bit of a world building to explain it in more detail. So if you think of all the different people in this world as being their own race, they are referred as kinden in the book itself. And all of these kinden, all of these races have an insect that they have a kind of an ancestral link to, what I call a totem insect to them. And they each have what they call ancestor art, which is linked in turn to this ancestral insect. So in this world, the Commonweal is home to the dragonfly kinden. These are kind of graceful, noble families, and their key defining point as inherited from the dragonfly is that they can manifest wings on their backs to enable them to fly. In the lowlands, you've got a whole hodgepodge of different kinden. You've got ant kinden who share a hive mind and can communicate wordlessly. You've got the beetle-kinden, who are some of the primary artificers in this world, real hard-working and sturdy people with great stamina. Fly-kinden, who again, like dragonflies, can manifest wings on their backs, and the list goes on. So you've got all of these people, and they generally will have their own kind of cities. So you get cities like Tark and Sarn, which are ant cities. You've got Mero, which is a fly city. And then you've got places like Collegium and Teleron, where basically it's a real cultural hotpot and there's people from all different kingdom there. Over in the east, and the empire that's building up as a real threat to the lowlands is the Wasp Empire. This is another kingdom who can fly, they've got the wings on the back, and they also have the ancestral art of a sting, which is kind of an energy bolt that they can fire from the palm of their hands as a weapon. So to go back to the story itself, then Stenwald Maker knows about the threat that the Wasp Empire poses, and he's been spending more than a decade trying to get the lowlands to open their eyes to them, and the lowlands basically are refusing to see what Stenwald knows to be truth. So by the time of the main events of the book, the Wasp Empire is really starting to push forward with their plans to take over the lowlands, and Stenwald Maker is sending out his spies to combat the Wasp spies to try and gather information so that he can stop the invasion from happening, or at the very least to allow him to open everyone's eyes up so that they can make plans and hopefully be able to stop the invasion when it does come. So to go ahead with my normal kind of format in here, I'll start off with the world building, and as I say, this is one of the key things that sets this series apart from any other series that I have read. This is for me a really unique world. The large part of the world building is in those different insect-kinden that I've spoken about. Normally when I'm talking about world building, you've got the geography and how much of the land has the author been able to actually show to us as being a completed world. Also, you've got the magic and the kind of mythology, the lore of the world as well. With the Shadows of the Apt, or focusing on Empire and Black and Gold, we do actually see a decent amount of the world. We see Collegium, we see Haleron, we see Tharn, which is the home of the moths close to Haleron. We hear of various other of the city-states. We've got the Forest of the Darakion, which is home to the Mantis-kinden. We see Aster, we see Minor, so we see quite a decent bit of the actual geography, at least of the lowlands, and we hear about other places that are outside the scope of the lowlands as well. So although we don't see the greatest amount of detail to most of these places, some of them we don't spend a vast amount of time in, which might explain that, but we do start to see a little bit of how these places are set out, as I've mentioned before, whether they are home to a particular kingdom or a little bit about the general feel of these locations. So I think that was quite well done, but it obviously leaves a lot of room for further development as the books progress. With regards to the lore, we see a bit about the apt and the inapt. I won't touch on this too much because I did speak about it in the Why You Should Read video that I linked in the cards earlier on. But we do learn an early bit about the apt and the inapt and the differences between them and how that kind of came about. But the main thing we see here is some of the ways that it affects the different characters, especially when we've got those interactions between characters who are apt and characters who are inapt. So to put it very bluntly on that, we've got apt characters who are like the artificers and can use tools and technology, and you've got the inapt who are more kind of based in the magical kind of realm of things, and they can't use the tools or the technology and really struggle with the concept of it. So we get a bit of that early on in book one, just to kind of set the scene really and start showing us some of the differences and the limitations between the apt and the inapt characters. The other thing we see is little bits and pieces of magic. Magic isn't really something which is big in this world. It's kind of almost died out really. And I guess just to explain it a little bit, a lot of what we see with the wings, with the sting that the wasps have, with the hive mind, a lot of that we would generally kind of consider as magic. It is very specifically not magic in this world. It's what they call the ancestor art that they've kind of inherited or evolved from their totem insect, if you like. Some kingdom do have actual magic which is outside of this ancestor art, and we do see a little bit of it. We see more talk of it, but we do also see a little bit of kind of the use of magic. And to kind of show that there's a difference between the the ancestor art and magic. Ancestor art is very well known. Everybody is aware of it. Everyone knows pretty much what other kinden can do. But you've then also got, notably, the apt characters in the book. There are instances where they will specifically say, I don't believe in magic, or you kind of get them trying to comprehend it, and it's kind of a mentality of, I cannot believe that there is magic in this world. I cannot believe that magic is actually a thing. So you've got this real kind of denial of sometimes what is actually in front of them being manifested. They kind of refuse to believe that this could actually be a thing. So it is very specifically a different thing to the ancestor art that in any other situation we as readers would probably see as being magic. As far as the characters go, we actually see quite a few characters already in book one. So we start off with Stenwald Maker as the one person who's been named so far. He's a Beetlekinden, he's an artificer, he's called Master Maker in the books because he's a master at the university in Collegium. He has a niece called Cheerwell Maker, or Che, and she's one of the spies who he kind of reluctantly, because of his family connection, he sends out to Halaron to start gathering this information on the Wasp invasion. He's also got a ward who is a girl of the same age as Che, and her name is Tynissa, or I've always read it as Tinissa, so I will generally call her that. Tinissa is a Spiderkinden, so the Spiderkinden kind of power, really, the ancestral art. The main one that people know about is kind of the power of seduction and kind of a power over people, power of suggestion, I guess, and getting them to follow along with your way and get them to do things that you want them to do. And then you've got Toffo, who is a beetle ant half-breed. He's another artificer who really looks up to Stenwald because he's kind of following in the same at least educational path that Stenwald did. And then the fourth member of this little group of spies is Selma, who is a dragonfly kinden, and he's actually a noble, he's a prince of the Commonweal. Outside of this little group, you've then got various other characters that we meet as well. Tissamon, the Mantis Kinden duelist, who's an old friend of Stenwald Maker. You've got Chaos, who is a moth kinden who gets involved in the operation that they have in Halaron. You've then also got additional side characters like Scuto and Belkus. So there's a whole host of characters that we get to know about, and they're all from different kindens as well. We don't actually have any kind of real main characters who share a kinden with the other. You've got obviously Toffo is a half-breed, but otherwise it's generally everyone's of a different kinden. I guess the main exception being Stenwald and Che, because they are actually family, they are both Beetlekinden. On the other side of the coin, you've then got the main character from the Wasp Empire that we see is Felric, who is a captain in the army and a major in the Rekef. Rekef is kind of the secret service of the Wasp, and he's very much seen as the leader of kind of the forward operations of the Wasp Empire. He's laying the groundwork and he's setting things in motion so that when the Wasp army invade, the path has already kind of been cleared for them. People have been misdirected and they think that the Wasps are there basically as their friends instead of going off and trying to invade them and take over their cities. In terms of what we see of the actual characters, some people say the characters don't really have a lot to them, and when I was rereading this book I realised that I actually dispute that more than I thought I did. Because obviously once you take aside the ancestral art, they are still characters underneath, and they do have heart, they do have their own feelings, they do have their own aspirations. And I really like some of the kind of the early signs that I can see in this book. Having read all 10 and knowing what the arcs of the various different characters are, it helped me to really appreciate what I could see as the kind of the starting points, kind of the catalysts to the overall story that each of these individual characters go on. So it's quite interesting in that respect, actually, to be able to see that with a bit of a more open eye, I suppose, as opposed to if I was reading this for the first time, I wouldn't know where these characters are going to go, so it would just be down to what I can pick up and what I can then extrapolate for myself as to what I think is the direction these characters are going to go on. But from Empire in Black and Gold, I liked what we saw of Felric. I think that he shows as a really interesting character. We start, as the book goes on, to see individual layers being peeled away and start seeing some of the depth of the character, rather than just the initial portrayal as, I love the Empire and I will do anything for the Empire. But we do start to see a little bit more, at least, of what drives him as a character. I also like the character of Tissamon from the story, and Tinissa or Tynissa, who are kind of very similar characters, and because of the age difference between them, once these characters become aware of each other, there's almost a kind of a natural mentor and mentee relationship that forms between them, so that's quite interesting to watch and to see that develop. So with Topho and Che, we're almost kind of thinking, well, why are you on this mission? It's almost like these are kind of the only ones that Stenwald could actually recruit as his spies, but we do start to see, even in the first book, some of their own kind of hidden talents, I guess, being brought out based on the scenarios that they're in. So it's quite interesting to see that kind of developing, I guess, for the first time. In terms of the plot of this particular book, I kind of see it as being a bit one-dimensional, if I'm honest. We see quite a linear plot, really, and there's not a lot of separation where the characters are going off onto their own separate paths and having what you would normally see as side plots. There is some separation between the cast of characters, but generally speaking, they do kind of converge before too long. So a couple of characters will go off at one point, but it's not too long before we see them all joining up together again. So it's kind of one-dimensional in that respect, but there's a lot of things happening within that one storyline. And obviously, as someone who's read the rest of the books in the series, I know the different paths that this will take going on, and certainly other books in the series are not so kind of single-minded as Empire in Black and Gold seems to be. I really enjoyed the opening of the book. We start off 17 years ago, basically, to the main story, and we're in the middle of a city called Minor, which has been invaded by the Wasps at the time. Stenwald Maker and Tissamon and a couple of their other colleagues are there. They've been doing kind of the same thing as we see them in the main portion of the book. They've been trying to set things in motion to stop the invasion. And what I really like about this opening to the book is that we see a bit of a world. We see the different kinden, with Wasp and Ant in particular, ancestral arts being on display. We see some of the motivations for the book, and we obviously see some of the characters with Stenwald and Tissamon and what kind of drives them. But we see all of that along with some quite intense action, all at the start of the book in this one chapter, without kind of pages of exposition telling us about the world and telling us about why these people are different and what the different kinden are and what they can do and so forth. We just learn this through kind of being thrown into the deep end at the start of the book with an action scene, and then once that's over, we move on to 17 years later, essentially, and that's where the book itself starts. So it's kind of a prologue almost that we have as chapter 1, which is set nearly 2 decades earlier. With other characters coming into the story, that opens up different avenues, with Tissamon and Achaos later on in the book joining this main core of characters, and with Felric having the different interactions with various members of the group as well. So it leads to some really interesting times. There's some great set pieces in the story with battle scenes that we have, kind of more skirmishes than full-scale battles, but I still like the way that they're done. This is primarily kind of a spies behind enemy lines scenario, so you've got a lot of escape and evasion going on, and they lead to some of my favourite parts of the book, where you've got this group of young adults who are inexperienced. They're not spies, have been training for it, but not necessarily openly. They don't necessarily know that the training they've been doing is to become spies. But you've got this quartet who are going out and they are meeting with actual professionals, actual soldiers and actual spy masters from the Wasp Empire, and trying to get the upper hand on them and trying to escape their clutches. So it leads to some really interesting and in some instances intense scenarios where they're on the verge of being caught, or they're close to gaining some information, or whatever the situation is. But I really like those, and it's not just kind of a typical fantasy story, because we don't generally see a vast amount of that, or at least I've not in the fantasy books that I've been reading. So moving on to my overall thoughts of the book, and starting off with a typical star rating, and I rated this 4 out of 5 stars because I thought it was really enjoyable, it was really interesting, trying to kind of base it just on my thoughts of book one. I did really enjoy it. I enjoyed being back in the world, back with these characters, and back to the start of this 10-book series. And with that enjoyment came a score of 17 out of 20 for this initial book in my own individual scale. For the world building, I gave this a really high score of 18 because of those points that I mentioned earlier on with seeing a decent amount of the world. But the main thing for me is the people themselves, not the characters, because that's a separate category, but the actual people themselves in terms of different types of kinden and what they can and can't do, and the way that we see that playing out. So this was 18 out of 20 for me, a really, really strong score. The characters I gave 16 out of 20. I really liked spending time with a number of these characters again. There's definite room for improvement that I can see. This is probably the hardest of the individual categories for me to rate because obviously I know the arcs that these characters have, I know the development and how far through the series they go and so forth. But just from what I saw in book one, I did quite like a number of the characters. There weren't really characters who I disliked, but it was obvious that there's definite room for improvement with basically all of the characters that we spend time with. For plot, I gave 16 out of 20 because, as I said, it was a little bit one-dimensional, but at the same time, I did really enjoy the plot as a whole and the way it was different to a lot of the fantasy that I've read. Writing style, I gave 7 out of 10. I really like Adrian Tchaikovsky's style. I'm really at home with his writing. I have no real problems with it. However, in book one, I did find that you can maybe kind of see that this is his debut novel. There's a bit of room for improvement with some of the areas of his writing. And one of those notably, I've seen people talking about the amount of head hopping. So instead of kind of true point of view characters that we generally would tend to be used to, we do see things moving along from one character and then another character and then another character, all in the space of a few paragraphs, and that's maybe a little bit jarring for some readers. For the pace, I thought it was quite well paced. There were the slower parts. We open up with an absolute banger of the first chapter, so I gave this 3 out of 5. And then for the discretionary, that was also 3 out of 5. Part of this is, I guess, because of my emotional connection to the book. Part of it is because of the uniqueness overall of the world and the characters and so forth. And also you've got things that I generally look for anyway in an interesting cover or a set of interesting covers in all the various different versions that have been released for different editions. And also the map work that you get in book one, just focusing on that one beyond all the others. But we do get to see a map of the lowlands, which I really do enjoy having when I'm reading a fantasy story. So overall, that adds up to 80 out of 100. 80% is a fantastic score, and it puts in equal 19th in my leaderboard of all the books that I've been reviewing using this rating format. So a really good job, a really great opening, and I'm really looking forward to reading book two with the wider community and also continuing the discussions with some of the people who've been reading Empire in Black and Gold already. So that's where we finish here. Let me know in the comments below if you've read Empire in Black and Gold or any of the other books in the series as well. Let me know your thoughts on it. If you're looking to read it, there's still time left in August to join in with a read along at the Library of Alexandria. I'll link Alan's channel in the description box below. As usual, if you like what you've seen today, give a video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button whilst you're here if you haven't already done so. I'll see you in another video soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves and read some good books. Bye bye.